Hey everyone, John Wertzma here, Life in the Last Days, and I am back with another teaching video. And today we have wars, and we have rumors of wars, and we have nation rising against nation. We've got kingdom rising against kingdom, and we have famines, we have pestilences, and we have earthquakes. Yes, we have all these things. Is this the beginning of sorrows? Are we entering into this time that Jesus talked about, the beginning of sorrows? This is the question of the day. This is the question of the moment. This is the question that all Christians should be considering, because all the time we should be watching and praying. We should be paying attention to what's going on in the world and praying and asking God and communicating with the Holy Spirit and asking, is this the time? You know what? It might not be the time, but it might be the time. And so we need to be always prepared, always watching. And we're going to talk about this today, the beginning of sorrows. What was Jesus referring to? Why did he bring in an analogy of a woman giving birth into the whole thing, dealing with end times and all these signs of the times that we're getting close to the end of the age? Remember, Jesus was answering the question that the disciples had: when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? And Jesus used an analogy of a woman not at the point of going into full-blown labor, but he made the analogy that all these things, the wars, the nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom, the famine, the pestilence, the earthquakes, these are all signs, warning signs that it's coming, that the full-blown labor is coming, but it's not here yet. So that is the analogy Jesus gave. And the big question is, why? Why did he use this analogy? Because it was on his mind. And I'm going to show you why it was on his mind. And because Jesus didn't say words just floating out there in the middle of nowhere that didn't have any context. So when he brought in the analogy of a woman giving birth, or the beginning signs of a woman who's about to go into labor, he was drawing from Isaiah 66. And that's what I'm going to show you today. And I'm going to show you how important of a thing that is to understand and to know. You know, this is our job. We study the scriptures, and we're trying to understand the intent of Jesus's thoughts and words and what he was trying to tell us. And if we can do that, we can harness the meaning behind his words, and then we can also apply it and see, hey, is this the time that he was talking about? Because all these things are happening right now. Is this the time that he was talking about? So here in Matthew chapter 24, verse 5, he said, "For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. You shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." That's a very important encouragement. Aren't you glad Jesus said, see that you be not troubled? In other words, don't get overwhelmed or consumed, overwhelmed. I guess that would be the best word, overwhelmed with fear. Okay, because there's a tendency in today's world to see all the stuff that's happening, all the craziness with the Russia, Ukraine, the NATO, the whole thing, and all the weapons and all the troop buildup. This is insane what's happening. This is escalating to a place we don't need it to be. And there's a tendency to kind of get worked up or to get anxious or to get in fear over what's going on. And aren't you glad Jesus said that he said, be not troubled? Okay, just have peace. Have peace in him, right? Trust in him, rest in him. He says, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. And he said, for nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in diverse places or different places around the world. All of these are the beginning of sorrows, the beginning of birth pangs, or the beginning of full-blown labor. These are all signs that full-blown labor is on the way. Okay? We're not in full-blown labor, but these are the signs that it's on its way. That's what Jesus was saying. Now, notice in verse 9, and I'm going to show this connection to Isaiah 66 here in just a second. But he went on to say this, then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Remember those words, for my name's sake. You shall be hated for my name's sake, right? Now let's go to Isaiah 66. Very important connection here on a number of different levels. But we're going to start reading in verse 5. I could take an hour, 2 hours to draw all the connections between a lot of different things in Isaiah 66 because there's a lot of stuff in this chapter. It's very important for our understanding of end time events. But we're just going to key in on a couple of really important things here. It says, hear the word of the Lord, you that tremble at his word. Who is he talking to? This is talking to God's people, right? The Lord is saying to his people who tremble at his word, listen, your brethren that hate you, that cast you out for my name's sake, that hate you, and they cast you out for my name's sake. What did Jesus say? You shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Matthew 24, verse 9. You think Jesus had Isaiah 66 on his mind when he said that? I do. I mean, he was drawing from Isaiah. He knew the scriptures. And we should draw that conclusion. That's the whole purpose of Bible study. We draw the conclusion. We see, well, Jesus wasn't just speaking in the, his words out there to float in the middle of nowhere, with no context. He was drawing from Isaiah 66. And the connection gets even greater as we continue to look at this, and we can see even more that Jesus had Isaiah 66 on his mind when he was answering the disciples' question on the Mount of Olives. Okay? So it says, your brethren that hated you, that cast you out for my name's sake, said, let the Lord be glorified. But he shall appear to your joy, and they shall be ashamed. He shall appear to your joy. That's talking about the appearing of the Lord. Now let me give you a little breakdown here of what's going on, because it isn't obvious, or it isn't obvious on the surface of what's going on. But let me give you a little context. During the first 3.5 years, okay, Christians are going to wake up to the realization. Okay, they're going to have a little bit of a rapture recalibration when they realize that we're in the last 7 years, and many people realize, why are we still here? The rapture didn't happen. Why are we still here? We're not supposed to be here. And so they're going to have to recalibrate their idea of the rapture. But that won't take long, okay? That realization will settle in really quick, and what's going to happen is Christians all over the world are going to become excited about the fact that Jesus is coming soon, and it's going to be a worldwide phenomenon. Christians are going to be, professing this and claiming that all the stuff that you see happening, Jesus is coming, Jesus is coming, Jesus is coming, and the people who are not God's people are going to get sick and tired of hearing the Christians talk about this so much. They don't love God. They hate God. They don't even care. They're just tired of these Christians who are boasting and proud, and that's the way they see it. And they just want them to shut up, and they hate them, right? So this is what's going on during the first 3.5 years. There's going to be a lot of persecution, a lot of things that happen. We see that under the fifth seal in the book of Revelation. The persecution is going to be rampant during the first 3.5 years. But it's going to escalate even further during the last 3.5 years under the reign of the Antichrist. But during the first 3.5 years, there's going to be a lot of persecution. And we get a glimpse of that here, right? Your brethren that hated you, that cast you out for my name's sake, said, let the Lord be glorified. Now let me give you the context here. They are going to say this mockingly. They're going to say, yeah, you keep saying the Lord's coming in all of his glory. Yeah, let's just see, let him be glorified. Let him be glorified. So this is the way that they're saying this to God's people. Let the Lord be glorified. But what is God's answer to that? He said, but he shall appear to your joy. The Lord shall appear to your joy. So, take heart, keep up with your testimony. Okay, what you believe is going to come to pass. And it says, and they shall be ashamed. That is the context of what's going on here. That is what Jesus is thinking about when he is giving the response in Matthew chapter 24. And then in verse 6, it says, a voice of noise from the city, a voice from the temple, a voice of the Lord that renders recompense to his enemies. That is the vengeance that is coming, the recompense that is coming, the wrath that is coming when the Lord appears. We see that happening under the sixth seal. The day of their wrath is come, who shall be able to stand? We see it under the seventh trumpet, where it says, the nations were angry, thy wrath has come. Okay, because when Jesus appears, he's coming back for his people, but he's also coming back in vengeance. Under the seventh trumpet, it says he's coming to destroy those who are destroying the earth. Okay, so there's a twofold application, and there's a twofold sense of something that's happening when Jesus appears. It's the great and terrible day of the Lord, right? So that's why it says here, the Lord renders recompense to his enemies when the Lord shall appear. But here is where it continues with the analogy, the symbolism that Jesus was giving in Matthew 24. So now we have another instance or a comparison here to show that what Jesus was talking about. So when he said the words that it's the beginning of sorrows, and he's using this analogy that all these signs, the earthquakes, the pestilence, the famines, the wars, all these things are the beginning signs that full-blown labor is coming. Let's read Isaiah 66 verse 7. It says, before she travailed, in other words, before she goes into full-blown labor, she brought forth. Before her pain came, she was delivered of a man-child, or she gave birth to a boy, right? Now, we have this instance here. Before she goes into full-blown labor, she gives birth. All right, that's crazy. That doesn't happen in real life. A woman goes into full-blown labor and then she gives birth. But here, it's she goes into labor, or she gives birth to a boy before she goes into full-blown labor. This is what Isaiah is prophesying. And there's a very important, specific reference, that meaning behind what's being said here. But then it says, who has heard such a thing? Exactly. Who has heard such a thing, that a boy is born before labor? Who has seen such things? Shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day, or shall a nation be born at once? Now here's the second part 2 of this whole thing. For as soon as Zion travailed, she brought forth her children. Okay, so first of all, I want you to pay attention to the word Zion. As soon as Zion travailed. So the she who is going into full-blown labor in verse 7 is identified in verse 8 as Zion. Now, you can go back and watch my video on the identity of the sun-clothed woman. I believe that's the title. I'll put the thumbnail image above me here for you to see, and you can see who the sun-clothed woman is that is giving birth in Revelation chapter 12. But here, I'm just going to give you a little bit of it here, is that Isaiah identified this woman who's giving birth as Zion. Zion is also known as the New Jerusalem, right? Paul said, the Jerusalem which is above is free, and she is our mother. She is our mother. Very significant words. Very, very, very significant words. You should meditate on it and ponder that over and over and over. Paul didn't say that for no reason. He said that for a reason. And there's a important thing that you need to see there. You just need to think about it and let it simmer and let it marinate in your mind until you get a hold of what's being said there. But For as soon as Zion travailed, soon as New Jerusalem travailed, and that's another way to say all believers of all time, or true Israel, not natural Israel. It's not talking about natural Israel. God, when the New Testament came into being, there was a connection between Jew and Gentile. During this time, there is neither Jew nor Gentile, right? We're all just believers. Before Christ died and was crucified and rose again, they were looking forward to the Messiah, right? All the stuff they did in the Old Testament, all the sacrifices and all those things were pointing to Christ. And now we look back at Christ and what he did. We're all believers of the same Messiah. We're all believers, if we believe in Christ, that Jesus was the Messiah. We're all believers in the same person, right? And so true Israel is all believers of all time. And that's who the woman represents. And so we have here two different things going on. And the reason we're spending so much time on this is because Jesus is the one who brought up the analogy of going in, the beginning of birth pangs or the beginning of full-blown labor. So this is important. He was referring to this. We should spend a lot of time trying to study and understand Isaiah 66, because without Isaiah 66 and without this prophecy, we have a really hard time unraveling end-time events. Very hard time. It's so critical. It's so important. I challenge you all, read Isaiah 66 every day for like a month. Just let it soak in and get a hold of it. It's so important. Okay? So we have two things happening. Before she travails, before she goes into full-blown labor, she gives birth to a boy, singular. And then, right here in verse 8, as soon as Zion travails, as soon as she goes into full-blown labor, she brings forth her children, plural. This is important. Now, let me just give you a summary of what this is referring to. Before the full-blown labor begins, the birth that takes place is the rapture. Because the resurrection is a birth. Remember when it says of Jesus that he was the firstborn from the dead. Okay, that tells you right there that the resurrection of Jesus was likened unto a birth, right? And so our resurrection, the resurrection that happens at the time of the rapture and our being caught up and being glorified, is a type of birth. The resurrection is a birth, right? And so when Jesus is using the analogy of a woman who's about to go into full-blown labor, and Isaiah is using this same analogy here, we should get in our minds that this is a resurrection. This is what's being talked about here. The birth of this boy is a resurrection. And this first one, before she travailed, before the travailing happens, before the full-blown labor happens, she is giving birth to a boy. This is the rapture. This is the resurrection that's happening. And it happens at midpoint of the last 7 years. Okay? So it happens before the labor. So the full-blown labor happens during the last 3.5 years. The beginning part, or the beginning of sorrows, or the signs that point to the full-blown labor, happens during the first 3.5 years. So we have the first 3.5 years as the beginning of sorrows. Those are the signs Jesus was talking about. And then we have the full-blown labor, which happens during the last 3.5 years. Because the woman still, even though the believers are caught up, all believers of all time are caught up, there's still people after that point in time, after the midpoint of the last 7 years, who become believers, who become Christians. Why? Because they see the Lord appear. Many, many people will get saved at that moment, but it'll be too late for them to be caught up in the rapture. And so the woman will still be present on the earth, because the woman is made up of all believers of all time on the earth, okay, during the last 3.5 years. But we know that the last 3.5 years are going to be very travailing. That's why it's called the labor pains, right? And so the last 3.5 years are the labor pains, and as soon as the labor pains begin, the full-blown labor, the woman brings forth her children, which is representative of the resurrection of all of those who are killed, all the believers who are killed during the last 3.5 years. And all of those believers will be caught up at the end of the 7 years as well. So this is a very important thing. So the question that we go back to Matthew chapter 24, and we ask the question, are we at the point in time we see right now, we see all of these things converging. We see the wars, we see the rumors of wars, we see the earthquakes, the famines, the pestilence, we see all these things. The question is, are we at the time of the beginning of birth pangs? And Christians all over the world, I would imagine, are wondering this same thing. And the answer to that question is, I don't know. But it's very possible that we are. And we shouldn't excuse that possibility. We shouldn't look at it and say, well, there's no way that now is the time because for one reason or another, I'm not ready or it's too hard to believe that we're here. Look, there's coming a day when we are going to be at the point in time when we'll go over into the last 7 years. And when we talk about the feasts of the Lord, the 7 feasts of Israel, the first 4 feasts, we have Pentecost, Feast of Unleavened Bread, First Fruits, and Passover. We have those 4. And Jesus fulfilled all 4 of those feasts on the actual feast days. And now we have 3 feasts left, and they're the fall feasts. And, it would tend to be reasonable to assume that the fall feasts would be fulfilled on the feast days themselves, just like the first 4 were. And so I believe that the rapture does need to happen during the fall season at some year in the future. But because of that, and because I believe that the rapture happens at midpoint of the last 7 years, we can backtrack 3.5 years, which means we'll enter into the last 7 years during the spring because of that half year. So if we backtrack 3.5 years from the fall of some future year, then we go to the spring of some year, right? And so somewhere around February, March, April, somewhere in there, I believe we're going to enter into the last 7 years. Now, whether or not that's this year or not, I don't know. But we have everything, all the ingredients here. We have everything here. And so, what can we do? All we can do is watch and pray and, trust God. Things can unravel really fast. And with what we see happening with this escalation over in, Russia, Ukraine, and all of the NATO alliance that's sending all the weapons and where is this going to lead to? What's going to happen? The outlook isn't good for this buildup of what's happening here. On top of that, we've had the huge earthquake over there in Turkey, and probably many more of those types of events are on the horizon. We've got the possibility, the threat. Well, it's not even a possibility. It's probably baked in the cake. That famine is already upon us because of a whole bunch of different reasons, with the shortages of wheat and all the food problems and the crops and all that. So we're seeing all of this converge right now at this time, and it's hard not to wonder if we're at the time that Jesus prophesied of these warning signs that this full-blown labor is going to come soon. And so anyway, just wanted to share that with you today, give you some food for thought. Pray, keep watching and praying. This is John Wertzema with Life in the Last Days. We'll see you on the next one.